You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 12th of June 2013. Immigration chaos won't ever be fixed. UK's new immigration boss can't rule out further backlog of unprocessed cases. Judges attack cuts to legal aid for migrants as they say any changes would set a bad example to the rest of the world. Businessman v burglars in midnight fight at his premises, now he's on a GBH charge. Muslim hate monitor to lose backing. British couple thrown to Spanish jail and fined £600 after refusing to pay for paella they didn't even order. Students taught about homosexual foreplay disguised as tolerance. Thought for the day, who'd have thought it? And finally, now you know. UK news. Immigration chaos won't ever be fixed. UK's new immigration boss can't rule out further backlog of unprocessed cases. New immigration boss Sarah Rapson said she may never finish the job of fixing Britain's chaotic visa processing system. The boss of Britain's new immigration body yesterday said its chaotic visa processing system will never be fixed. Rapson, who started as Director General of UK Visas and Immigration 54 days ago, believes she will never finish the job, and she told MPs she couldn't rule out finding more backlogs of unprocessed cases in the system she had inherited. Are we ever going to say about this really quite difficult organisation with a set of complex things it has to do, is it perfect? I don't think so, she told the Home Affairs Select Committee. My intention is to make some improvements. I would be grateful for the committee's advice on where we could prioritise. But will we ever finish the job? No. She told the committee the agency was currently processing 190,000 cases. Committee Chairman Keith Vaz replied, "You do realise you're giving us new figures we didn't know about. These are astonishing figures." Ms Rapson said she would not have taken the job if she was not slightly optimistic she could make a difference. But she added, "There are lots of people in the organisation who have got ideas about how we can make things better. Is it ever going to be fixed?" I answered that question from you earlier. I don't think so. World at 8 says she's going to have to make a sodding great omelette and break an awful lot of eggs to clear this muddle of many years up. Judges attack cuts to legal aid for migrants as they say any changes would set a bad example to the rest of the world. Justice Secretary Chris Grayling said the budget deficit meant it was wrong that individuals with little connection to this country should be able to claim legal aid. Senior judges and barristers yesterday claimed that cutting legal aid for illegal immigrants and failed asylum seekers would undermine the rule of law and set a bad example to the rest of the world. Their comments were an official response to moves by Justice Secretary Chris Grayling to stop migrants from getting taxpayer-funded help until they have lived lawfully in the UK for 12 months. He said the budget deficit meant it was wrong that individuals with little or no connection to this country are able to claim legal aid to bring civil actions at UK taxpayers' expense. But his proposals were roundly condemned by the Civil Justice Council, a government advisory board. It features England's second most senior judge, the Master of the Rolls, and other leading judges as well as top barristers and solicitors. They warned the measures could undermine the fundamental principle of equality before the law. Immigrants could be left unable to bring or defend claims that are crucial to their lives, such as disputes over housing. The CJC added, "It diminishes the credibility of the UK's encouragement of the rule of law elsewhere in the world, just at a time when that is of considerable national and international importance." Currently there are no nationality or residence limits on civil legal aid. Mr Grayling insisted funds were not limitless and must be targeted at those with a strong link to this country. World at 8 says, "We would endorse Mr Grayling's suggestions with a bit of tweaking. That of not giving any form of legal aid to anyone who has not lived in this country 25 years or more. I frankly don't care about whether they're housed or their human rights are affected. We need more human rights in Britain for the British who have lived here all their lives." Businessman vs burglars in midnight fight at his premises, Now he's on a GBH charge. A businessman who confronted suspected burglars raiding his premises at night could be jailed after he grabbed one of the gang's weapons and used it to fight back. Andrew Woodhouse, 43, claims he was chasing thieves off his property when one of them came at him with a wooden stick. In the scuffle he managed to grab the stick and used it to injure the man's legs before holding him down and screaming at his wife to call the police. After a series of burglaries at his paving firm in Abergavenny, South Wales, Mr Woodhouse thought he might finally have helped to bring one of the robbers to justice. But then police arrested Mr Woodhouse as well and held him in a cell for 18 hours. He's been charged with grievous bodily harm with intent and will appear before magistrates on Thursday, along with the 2 men he apprehended. Mr Woodhouse's case has led to calls for the Crown Prosecution Service to show common sense in dealing with those who defend themselves outside, with MPs calling the decision to prosecute him astonishing. If found guilty, he could face a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Mr Woodhouse employs 6 staff, including 2 of his sons, at the family business, which was set up 20 years ago. The firm has lost £15,000 in recent years due to thefts of diesel and tools. World at 8 says Mr Woodhouse must convert to Islam as soon as possible, get himself a human rights lawyer, preferably from Matrix, and the CPS won't dare prosecute him. After all, if you are of the right religion, you can apparently get away with murder in broad daylight. Muslim hate monitor to lose backing. Ministers end funding for body that claimed wave of attacks against Islam. A controversial project claiming to measure anti-Muslim attacks will not have its government grant renewed after police and civil servants raised concerns about its methods. The project, called Tell Mama, claimed that there had been a sustained wave of attacks and intimidation against British Muslims after the killing of drummer Lee Rigby, with 193 Islamophobic incidents reported to it, rising to 212 by last weekend. The group's founder, Fiaz Mughal, said he saw no end to this cycle of violence, describing it as unprecedented. The claims were unquestionably repeated in the media. Tell Mama and Mr Mughal did not mention, however, that 57% of the 212 reports referred to activity that took place only online, mainly offensive postings on Twitter and Facebook, or that a further 16% of the 212 reports had not been verified. Not all the online abuse even originated in Britain. Contrary to the group's claim of a cycle of violence and a sustained wave of attacks, only 17 of the 212 incidents, 8%, involved the physical targeting of people, and there were no attacks on anyone serious enough to require medical treatment. World at 8 comments. Also note the fact that if a Muslim had been hacked to death by 2 soldiers in London in broad daylight, the whole of the Muslim communities would be up in arms and London would be on fire from end to end, i.e., along with a few tweets or second-rate fires, has any Muslim actually died as a result from Lee Rigby's murder? Muslim cleric who was top terror suspect sues MI5 for £50,000 compensation over house arrest. A Muslim cleric is demanding £50,000 compensation from the Home Office after he was placed under house arrest over his suspected links to Al-Qaeda. The man, who can only be referred to as AE because an anonymity order prevents him being named, is one of the least 4 former terror suspects who courts have given the go-ahead to sue for illegal detention. The alleged hate preacher was put under a control order for 3 years after MI5 reportedly suspected him of being one of the greatest terror threats to national security. His movements were restricted, he was banned from using the internet or a mobile phone and prevented from studying science at college. The man, who lives in Britain with his wife and children, was also forbidden from contacting a ring of alleged extremists linked to a British mosque. But the control order, made in 2006, was squashed by the High Court when the security services refused to reveal more of the evidence against him after a request from the Iraqi cleric's lawyers, it was reported by the Daily Mirror. In a court document detailing its evidence, MI5 alleged AE had extremist and criminal contacts in the UK. During a search of his home in August 2005, MI5 said that his computer revealed he had visited websites selling toy remote-controlled helicopters and cars. It alleged he had also looked into buying low-light pinhole cameras and had been involved in identity fraud on behalf of his extremist contacts. World at 8 says, Poor creature, he's only playing with his toys, innit? European news. British couple thrown in Spanish jail and fined £600 after refusing to pay for a paella they didn't even order. A British couple who say they were charged for an extra paella while on holiday ended up in a Spanish prison cell after complaining. Jeff Cox and his partner Bridget Keys visited a restaurant on their cycling vacation from Cordoba to Granada. They noticed a meal for an extra €15, £12.70 on their bill, and highlighted it with the waiter. But he argued with them and they refused to pay the extra cash. Mr Cox, speaking after returning to the UK following his and Miss Keys' arrest on May the 17th, told the Dorking Advertiser, "We pointed out the extra paella and the waiter went off like a firecracker. We put down €105 and said we would pay that, but he wanted €120. It got a bit ugly, and when he said he would call the police we said, right, fine, because we were certain they would side with us." But when the police arrived, the couple were arrested. They spent the night in the local police cells having their shoes confiscated and given nothing to eat or drink until the next morning. The next day they were given access to a lawyer and a translator, only to find out that Mr Cox had been charged with assault on a police officer, resisting arrest and defrauding a restaurant. It's a bloody outrage and we must make sure that our fine gets to the right place. If it gets lost in the system, we could find ourselves facing a European extradition warrant, so I'm still worried about it. World news. Students taught about homosexual foreplay disguised as tolerance. A school district in Maine is apologising after middle school students learnt about homosexual foreplay during what was supposed to be a Diversity Day presentation. "I don't want my child taught heterosexual foreplay, let alone homosexual foreplay," said an outraged parent, Christy Howard. The principal of Gorham Middle School sent a letter to parents apologising for the graphic nature of the presentation by PRISM, proud rainbow youth of southern Maine. Bob Emmerich of Protect Marriage Maine said he wasn't surprised by the content of the so-called diversity class. "Homosexual activists rarely advertise that they are going to indoctrinate children to their point of view," he said in a statement. "It's done under the radar through mandatory diversity, anti-bullying and tolerance lessons." If there was any doubt that gay marriage would be taught to young children in Maine schools, just as it is in Massachusetts and Canada, that doubt should be removed now, he said. "If they're willing to teach our kids how homosexuals engage in foreplay, do you really think they won't force gay marriage instruction of young children when it is the law of the land?" Thought for the day. Well, who'd have thought it? Well, who would have? Our Nick Griffin in Syria, good on him. I told him to give Assad my very best, and I hope he has, although of course Bashir doesn't know me from a hole in the head and probably doesn't listen to World at 8, although he should, as we all support him in this office. Nick Griffin is quite right, and I hope that the EU doesn't cast its usual wrong-footed, wrong-everything cloak over this one, or a sickly, treacly-like substance appeasing the so-called rebels in Syria. Have you noticed that in modern-day parlance, rebels denotes free thinkers and wonderful people fighting against terrible wrongdoings? All a load of complete baloney, of course, in many cases, especially in the worlds of Islam. These people, regardless of race, which takes away the race card, would quarrel over two exhausted donkeys carrying bricks in an African hovel. In fact, what is the new meaning of the word protest? Two Muslims standing in a square. Muslims can find the time when not pointing their arses to Allah or Mecca or whatever to protest and fight about practically everything and anything. Usually stuff none of their business but solely of the country they have invaded, and the exception to this rule is the silence over the public butchery of Lee Rigby, which, if you notice, is a non-event now. Oh no, sorry, no, not a non-event, but a less important event than the retaliation by certain racist organisations in apparently creating minor fires at Islamic watering holes and jihadist training schools. My, who'd have thought it? One of our own is not yet cold from a disgusting attack that occurred in broad daylight with God knows how many witnesses either by camera or person, and not only are the murderers still classed as suspects, but even when in full flow the media concentrated on how the various mixed communities were functioning, or rather, in these sentimental and stupid words, coming to terms with it. Why should we come to terms with it? Is it going to become open season on serving soldiers in London if they happen to be white and non-Muslim? Is it going to be endorsed as a sport by Boris the Loris? Rather like pacifying poor starving Romans with the games, are we pacifying well-off invasive parasites with hacking a non-parasite to death for fun? Is this the shape of things to come? I bloody hope not, although I feel we as a people are awfully near this point, even if just by being apathetic and in denial, which is incidentally a river in Africa as well. Poor Lee aside, and believe me he has been shoved aside as a none too comfortable media item, NG in Syria is a good thing. Even the papers can't do much to bugger this move up, although some are desperately trying. Nick is there by invitation along with several of his colleagues from the belly of the beast the EU, and contrary to sending the African Baroness Amos as in the case of Libya, let's hope they will be allowed to tell the truth about the situation in that country. All we get on the TV news over here are pictures of children drawing awful pictures of blood and gore because that is what they saw. Oh miseria mea, my sons and especially my youngest son drew pictures of decapitations and worse, and in fact was well known for the goriness of his pictures when at primary school, and he'd never seen a thing pertaining to it, so forget that one. Also he had not grown up so far into a mad axe murderer who kills army personnel on the streets, so I'm thankful for that. The point missed in these so-called heart-rending reports is that these are the children of the so-called rebels, and in another time and place would have been put to the sword summarily, because these little jihadists in the making will grow up to become the rebels and fundamentalist Islamists that might kill your children. Another point which is conveniently eluding the media is that Muslims put their own women and children in the forefront of civil battles, in the buildings that they have to share with the mortar bombers and snipers, so of course it looks bad when they show little babies with legs blown off being carried out. If their women and children were put somewhere safe or sent away, as many are, these pictures would not be available. But in a well-known phrase, any publicity is better than no publicity, even if it means a small human life. And these Muslims are doing it in the name of their particular branch of Allah to their own people, so what chance does Europe stand? Just a thought. Our politicians, establishments, councils, educational bodies and practically anything or everything with any clout have been so diversity ridden for the last 30 years that they are incapable of thinking outside the multicultural box. For many years the mantra has been an all-encompassing and encouraging to newcomers to travel and conquer the UK and Europe, that even we Brits are thinking that when we reject this form of submission that is Islam, we are doing something wrong and racist and we should know better. This is not the case. When even a well-meaning politician, and there are still some left, tries to alter or reform one of our failing institutes, as in the case of Michael Gove and the education system, he's met with resistance. Furthermore, if anyone were to suggest that our once great education systems have been dumbed down to suit an increasingly dim-witted white youth and an ever more increasing number of schools overrun with foreign non-English speaking pupils, and that this should be rectified, all hell would break loose. Of course the examinations are accommodating the main body of pupils. You only have to watch the results glowingly showed on local TV stations of moronic youngsters preparing to go to some fairly new modern uni to study forced nails or history, or a clutch of ethnics off to a better uni to study law or how to reduce the English population by overbreeding, and the picture is final. Yes, Michael, bring back harsher exams, reduce the intake of foreigners in all schools, and bring back the Holy Bible, prayers for Christians, non-halal food, make English speaking mandatory, male teachers for male classes, stop mixed schooling, mainly because most Brit girls get knocked up by nignogs or groomed by Muslims, stop part-time female teachers who are frankly no bloody good, and stop the diversity message completely. British history and religion to be enforced. If other cultures don't approve, let them leave and take their kids with them. The only reason polytechnics have become unis is that they can get more state money, and they also get more money from foreign students who of course inevitably stay on here well into their dotage. So reduce many unis to what they were, art colleges and technical colleges. Keep the old and established universities, Oxford, Cambridge and a few others, although they are now hotbeds of radicalism. They used to be hotbeds for communism, but to each his own, I say. The trouble seems to be that whatever happens in our streets with Islam at the end of an enema, our people and our governments refuse to acknowledge where the blame lies. It lies in taking too many different people in, not deporting those who should be deported, including criminals, before sentencing, and the sham marriage brigade, child traffickers, and moreover accommodating these bastards to the detriment of our children and our well-known establishments. Looking at television now is not Spot the White Brigade, but a worse scenario, which to our public is apparently more acceptable. That of everyone mixed in with everyone else. The soaps, although beneath most people's viewing, remains to me a constant source of the way people at the top propagandise. We have the two main ones, Corro and EastEnders, with an ever-burgeoning ethnic theme, the worst being EastEnders, which if it ran true to actual ethnic stats, would almost entirely comprise of blacks or Asians of one variety or another. At the moment the Muslim family has broken up and Mahmoud Sr. is carrying on an affair with a middle-aged white woman and appears quite happy and none protesting for a Muslim. The centre is now a very dysfunctional white family and an even more dysfunctional section of blacks, which seem to increase by the day. Corro has had its share of Asians, with the last one being non-Muslim of course, whose live-in ex-wife apparently got drunk and set fire to a pub in which she dies, with the bad white guy doing the honours in reality. There have been several girls passing for white in Corro, but so far they're keeping it to the northern side, not the Bradford side. Of course Emmerdale I gave up watching because all the girls had fallen into the Black Sea coming over here and it promoted Asian takeover of local industry and seems now almost entirely Indian and could be taking place in Calcutta, not the Yorkshire Dales. So this is what our children, teenagers and families are watching nowadays, a truly multicultural mess. All the adverts show mixed race couples and one of my favourites, Dinner Date, shows homosexual dating, but this so far has been relegated to homosexual males, and of course multicolour is the norm. If I'd ever been asked to go into one of these shows I would have said that I didn't want a colour partner of any race other than white. Why? Not because I'm a racist, but because I know that at some point, even if we got on like a house on fire, I would, when losing my temper at some inevitable stage, mutter a racist comment. That's just the way people are, if they're honest with themselves, which we in Europe clearly are not. As I've said before, even my own kind get on my tits, so God help another kind. This statement applies to me personally, not the British National Party in any way. Things have got so bad with advertising companies they're using meerkats and all forms of other cartoon animals to avoid using mixed couples, families and situations. You can just hear the Trevor Phillips Brigade bleating on about the ads used many years ago when you never saw an Asian or black face, just the faces of the people which inhabited our country then, which were mainly white. But now you'll see even the remakes of classical plays and films the inevitably black or mixed race face where none existed in the actual bloody book. Laughingly, and it does produce a laugh in this household, we have bets on when and where those faces will come in and just how silly and unsuitable they often are. Even taking into account the fact that many of these plays and films have been made popular in the past by the fact they have remained true to their original writings, they still have accommodated the new theology of black is good and white is bad mantras so often thrown out to the public. They must work because we have an increasing number of apathetic people who think it's better to be overrun in the future than to be a racist bastard. Because to think along those lines is of course extreme race hatred and will not be tolerated in a modern enriched society or something along those lines. My question would be to the great British masses, if it is racist to question massive immigration and the resulting mess, what word denotes ignorance and apathy to one's own people, environment and future? Does this have a word, thought form or mantra? Is this covered in our education systems or our governmental policies? Is this word on the lips of everyone in the thinking communities or none-thinking sheeples? Does it come up in questions in Parliament? Is it written in the press? Is it hyped up in the media? Is it a word that kills with utterance? Is it a word that should never be spoken? I'll leave you to give me that word, because I frankly can't think of a word that beats racist, for the sheer horror to people that it entails, and it does, as Trotsky intended, halt any further communications on many subjects. If one utters the words truth, honesty, far-seeing, caring, love, lucidity, exclusivity, prophetic, sad, rigidness and many more, people don't react as they react to being called racist. How about the word rebel that seems to be the word beloved by the media nowadays? Perhaps we should rebel against the privatisation of our country by other companies. You can't rebel against racism because we as nationalists are deemed as racists, so we lose out there. You see just how clever this word is. I've thought of a word sitting in the sidelines of the demolition of a country's structure, people, society, religion and economic institutes, and it is who'd have thought it? Who would have thought that we Brits could just roll over and take it and indeed hold out the Vaseline jar for grimy Muslim fingers? In fact, if we could take a day from the future, would we regret not having been more racist or more open to the fact that diversity, enrichment, multi-faiths, multi-submission and turning the other cheek did not work out for us as a people or a country? Would we have wished that we had braved the stigma of being a nationalist and stood up and been counted? What would we tell our suddenly unsocialist, unliberal and unmulticultured and disfranchised descendants about what we did to try and stop the Islamification of our country for their children? What indeed? Who'd have thought it will be heard ringing from the non-existent belfries of non-existent churches in a non-existent land? Who would have thought it? Indeed. And finally, now you know the answer to a certain question. Men finally grow up at the age of 43, a full 11 years after women mature, according to a new survey. A study into the differences in maturity between genders revealed both men and women agree men remain immature well into their late 30s and early 40s, the Telegraph has reported. Apparently the average age at which women mature emerged at 32. Alarmingly, 8 out of 10 women believe that men never stop being childish, with breaking wind, burping, eating fast food in the early hours and playing video games their biggest bugbears. Staying silent during arguments, not being able to cook simple meals and retelling the same old jokes and stories when with the lads were also hailed as signs of immaturity. The research was commissioned by Nickelodeon UK to mark the launch of the new show Wendell and Vinny, showing weeknights at 7 p.m. Tim Patterson, VP, Director of Programming, Nickelodeon UK said, "As a man, especially one who works for a children's channel, the question if men ever reach maturity is one I'm well accustomed to. However, as the characters Wendell and Vinny show in our new programme, a difference in maturity between two people definitely makes for an amusing partnership." This presenter says, "Oh boy, who did that research? Everyone knows that men never grow up, they just grow old. Women are born old really. Although I feel 16 in my brain, my body simply doesn't recognise that fact and carries on getting older. Very unfair really. As for Wendell etc, just copped a look and it's truly awful stuff to show our younger idiots all canned laughter and US accents. When are people going to realise that people do not talk or relate to one another the way families or partners do in TV or on the films? We Brits are a silent breed really, whereas we used to be stiff British upper lip, we're now just plain dumbed down. Just a short note, there'll be no Euro report this Friday from Nick Griffin MEP, as he is of course out of Europe in Syria. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynne Mozar and I wish you all a very good night. The set of complex things it has to do is perfect? I don't think so, she told the Home Affairs Select Committee. My intention is to make some improvements. I would be grateful for the committee's advice on where we could prioritise. But will we ever finish the job? No. She told the committee the agency was currently processing 190,000 cases. Committee Chairman Keith Vaz replied, "You do realise you're giving us new figures we didn't know about. These are astonishing figures." Ms Rapson said she would not have taken the job if she was not slightly optimistic she could make a difference. But she added, "There are lots of people in the organisation who have got ideas about how we can make things better. Is it ever going to be fixed?" I answered that question from you earlier. I don't think so. World at 8 says she's going to have to make a sodding great omelette and break an awful lot of eggs to clear this muddle of many years up. £100 after refusing to pay for paella they didn't even order. Students taught about homosexual foreplay disguised as tolerance. Thought for the day, who'd have thought it? And finally, now you know. UK News. Immigration chaos won't ever be fixed. UK's new immigration boss can't rule out further backlog of unprocessed cases. New immigration boss Sarah Rapson said she may never finish the job of fixing Britain's chaotic visa processing system. The boss of Britain's new immigration body yesterday said its chaotic visa processing system will never be fixed. Rapson, who started as Director General of UK Visas and Immigration 54 days ago, believes she will never finish the job, and she told MPs she couldn't rule out finding more backlogs of unprocessed cases in the system she had inherited. Are we ever going to say about this really quite difficult organisation with
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 12th of June 2013. Immigration chaos won't ever be fixed. UK's new immigration boss can't rule out further backlog of unprocessed cases. Judges attack cuts to legal aid for migrants as they say any changes would set a bad example to the rest of the world. Businessman v burglars in midnight fight at his premises, now he's on a GBH charge. Muslim hate monitor to lose backing. British couple thrown to Spanish jail and fined £600. Judges attack cuts to legal aid for migrants as they say any changes would set a bad example to the rest of the world. Justice Secretary Chris Grayling said the budget deficit meant it was wrong that individuals with little connection to this country should be able to claim legal aid. Senior judges and barristers yesterday claimed that cutting legal aid for illegal immigrants and failed asylum seekers would undermine the rule of law and set a bad example to the rest of the world. Their comments were an official response to moves by Justice Secretary Chris Grayling to stop migrants from getting taxpayer-funded help until they have lived lawfully in the UK for 12 months. He said the budget deficit meant it was wrong that individuals with little or no connection to this country are able to claim legal aid to bring civil actions at UK taxpayers' expense. But his proposals were roundly condemned by the Civil Justice Council, a government advisory board. It features England's second most senior judge, the Master of the Rolls, and other leading judges as well as top barristers and solicitors. They warned the measures could undermine the fundamental principle of equality before the law. Immigrants could be left unable to bring or defend claims that are crucial to their lives, such as disputes over housing. The CJC added, "It diminishes the credibility of the UK's encouragement of the rule of law elsewhere in the world, just at a time when that is of considerable national and international importance." Currently there are no nationality or residence limits on civil legal aid. Mr Grayling insisted funds were not limitless and must be targeted at those with a strong link to this country. World at 8 says, "We would endorse Mr Grayling's suggestions with a bit of tweaking. That of not giving any form of legal aid to anyone who has not lived in this country 25 years or more. I frankly don't care